Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Liora Landi explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now, for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time. And today, Rabbi, we are going to delve into just the ramifications of the Iran memorandum of understanding that was announced a couple of days ago as we're recording this. How this is landing, what do we see this as implications within our own community? I think at the outset we can say we don't come to this as political commentators. There are many much more qualified than us to do so, but more to talk about some of the ways that, especially on the American Jewish community and having one foot in Israel as well, how this is being felt and maybe what are some of the worries going forward. So I'll just open up with that to begin with. Have some thoughts, maybe you do as well. Who do you want to start with this one?
Well, I think it's interesting that one of the things that we've seen at the moment is that Israel had a lot of confidence in everything that it was doing in the world, in the Middle East, because it had the backing of Trump. And I think that that was something that Israelis were proud of to some extent. Like, look at us, we are supported by the American president. We are going to end this war. Netanyahu, even if people didn't support him, felt maybe in some ways safer because Trump was explicitly supporting Netanyahu. And now we're in a moment where that's not necessarily holding up. And Netanyahu is up for re-election. There's elections that are going to be had this fall. And one of the ways that Netanyahu is trying to advocate for his position to keep being prime minister is to show that he can differentiate himself from President Trump, and he doesn't have to necessarily explicitly listen to what Trump says, and he's not a pawn or a puppet of President Trump. And so it's really interesting to see how Israeli politics are now taking kind of a different form because they have to balance appeasing this world entity, and also he has to fight for himself in these elections and show that he can stand on his 2 feet. So we're really in an interesting moment where global politics, Middle Eastern politics, geopolitics are meeting these characters who also are deeply invested in an ego battle between them.
Yeah, I think that for the past 20 years, plus that Netanyahu has really made a series of claims to the Israeli voting public, largely successful. One of those claims, so I don't say that each one of those 3 claims I'm going to mention have all been shattered in recent months.
Absolutely.
First claim was that I'm going to keep you safe.
Yeah.
That he was going to be the babysitter or the BB sitter he would use in his advertisements even. And October the 7th really put an end to that. Number 2 was that he was going to be close with the American government, the American president, especially after speaking in Congress during Obama's term, really against Obama and the JCPOA, and then really siding with Trump, and then keeping somewhat relations with Biden, but then until Trump came back again, have been posters all over Israel, I'm sure you've seen them, of Bibi standing next to Trump as a way to demonstrate support of Netanyahu. And the third one was to make the case that Iran posed an existential threat, not only to Israel, but to the world. And that's really been Bibi's main argument for the past 20 years. And you're seeing a point now in which a majority of the American electorate is disagreeing on that basic point, and where a lot of other world governments are. And so it seems as though as elections arrive this fall, that many of the main claims that Netanyahu has made seem to be punctured. And I think that to this point, I don't know if you saw it yesterday, as of recording yesterday, in the Wall Street Journal, there was an op-ed by Avi, and it was making the case that America should not be beholden to Israel, and Israel should not be beholden to America, and that each country should pursue its own interests, and Israel doesn't need any help in pursuing its interests. It just doesn't need to be sort of muzzled or chained. which is very much Lieberman's stance. And it was a very well-written op-ed piece, but stood in clear contrast to Netanyahu's legacy. And you see how as the politics shift and the earth beneath the politicians' feet shift as we hit the election, that what's happening in this moment of conflict with Iran is fundamentally influencing what's happening in the upcoming Israeli elections.
I mean, I think it's so fascinating that character and personalities play such a big part in this. And sometimes that's a little disturbing to me that world decisions and history is being made by people's feelings, which I suppose is how it's done. But I think that in Israel at this moment, there is a sense that there is a possibility to oust Netanyahu, and everything that as you said, everything that he's proposed as being something that you can rely on, safety and the eradication of Iran and the eradication eventually of Hamas, none of those really stood up. And he doesn't stand behind what he proposes, or he can at the moment. And I think that there's a whole movement that's coming together, that came together right before he was reelected for this last term, of many different ideologies that are saying we can put our differences on the side and come together in order to make sure that he is not the prime minister again.
Which I would say, actually is in contrast to the last election, where different groups in the center and the center left all made vows that they would not sit in the government with Netanyahu.
Yes.
Which meant that when the government was being put together, Netanyahu could not rely on them to make the majority, and so turned to both the ultra-Zionist right and to the Haredi right, and the center left was completely left out of the government altogether. And I think that there's a big lesson to be learned there. There was also infighting between both the center-left liberal Israeli parties and a lot of infighting between the Arab parties that had split. And because of that split, we're not able to even get the minimum amount in order to gain threshold into the Knesset. And I'm hoping that some lessons were learned along the way, because would hate to have history repeat itself and just go through this entire process all over again.
I mean, I think that that's one of the most interesting things about the Israeli Knesset, is that it's so fractured, and I'm not even saying in a negative way, meaning like there's so many different pieces of the puzzle that have to fit together, and it's amazing when they work together for a common goal. I think that really one of the main issues at this moment, beyond the safety of Israel as a whole, beyond Iran, beyond America's influence, beyond America being able to protect Israel, is also the ultra-Orthodox draft issue, which has become something that Israelis of all parts of the spectrum just cannot tolerate anymore. They cannot stomach it. Right. And the ultra-Orthodox have taken it to a very scary extreme, where they're protesting at the homes of judges, where they're intimidating judges, where they're fire bombs. I mean, I had a Zoom with an Israeli friend who was an hour late to our Zoom because they were stuck in Haredi protest traffic because they couldn't get home because they were blocking the streets so that they don't have to serve in the military. So there's so many things happening at this moment that I think are not just going to reframe the way that Israel looks, hopefully. I don't even think that like it's a hope. Israel has to kind of figure out its direction. It's really in a crossroads moment. But I think that we're looking at a moment that's going to maybe reframe a lot of the way that the world itself is gonna go forward.
Yeah, I had a really depressing thought this past week, among depressing thoughts, which was when the memorandum of understanding first was leaked and then came out, the details, and to what degree really Israel was not included in the deliberations, and Israel's interests were not prioritized at all. And the U.S. seemed to give in to Iran's demands that Lebanon, its proxy, be included within the negotiations. One of my thoughts was, well, maybe it's kind of a good thing, because now people will stop talking about the fact that Netanyahu and Israel control American foreign policy. Maybe it's good that Israel's being left at the altar because people will now just shut up about this idea that Netanyahu and AIPAC that they control American politics and American foreign policy. And then I thought to myself that it's such a diasporic way to think, such an un-Israeli way to think,
Well,
to say
you're not
that
really.
I know, but that's such a weak diasporic thing to think that, oh, I'm somewhat glad actually that, we're not being treated very well because then our masters will see that we're not actually that bad after all. It was again, like I'm not proud of that thought, but
Yeah.
it's with a lot of emotion. I feel like I think it mirrors something going on in Israel as well. I think that for a lot of the Israelis that I know, that there's been a general feeling as though military kinetic strength is what is most important to defend Israel, and um, PR strength and making other countries like us um, is overrated or can never actually be achieved. And so, shmum, like the saying goes, whatever the UN says, who cares? Whatever all of these terrible countries say, we're basically going to be strong militarily, and that's going to be enough, and people are going to want to partner with us because of our strength. I think that there's some real second guessing happening in Israel as well to say, we may have won the kinetic war with all of Iran's proxies, including Hamas and Hezbollah, but look at our standing in the world compared to where we were several years ago. And what does it mean if the young people in America overwhelmingly side with Hamas over Israel? And is that something we can really keep up? Like, can we really say that doesn't matter at all for our long-term security if our diplomacy is so in the toilet? That's a really hard thing to reckon with. And I think that Israelis are understanding that a bit more now.
I think they're understanding it for so many reasons. First of all, like they still don't feel safe traveling to certain places. They feel it because they're called out when they are traveling in those places. Um, and yeah, I think what you said isn't weak or meek in any way. I think it's very, no, really, I think it's truly realistic to have that thought of what what does it do for us? Does it help us? Does it put us in danger? Does it where's our standing
Yeah.
because of this war? I mean, I do you think that there was another solution? I don't think that we have the ability to even go back and say what was and what if and what could have been, but
I don't think there's any solution now. I think, and this is, as more of the details are come to be known, I don't think this MOU is worth the paper it's written on. I
yeah.
don't think that the parties behind it think it's worth the paper it's written on. I think you've got both Trump and Iran who don't trust one thing the other say. They don't trust what they say themselves because they both know that they are constantly going back and backtracking on these things. Um, I think, last week we talked about sports. Can I use a sports metaphor with you, Rabbi?
I've been working on my sports analogy, so yes, please.
I want to talk to you about the difference between an NFL contract and a NBA or a baseball contract.
Okay, I feel like I should know this anyway, so
In
yeah, explain.
sports like within like basketball or
Mhm.
baseball, the contracts are guaranteed. You say you're going to pay a player X amount of dollars over X amount of years, and you're stuck with that, and that's what you're going to do. The NFL contracts are non-guaranteed. So and often this happens, a team will make an announcement, say we signed this great wide receiver for 7 years for $250 million.
Mhm.
And the wide receiver knows, and the team knows that there is absolutely no truth to that whatsoever because none of it's guaranteed. All that really matters is the signing bonus and the actual guaranteed money. The rest of it is just there
Mhm.
pretty much to, pad the agent and make it look really big, but it's not. I think that we are treating this MOU like it is a NBA contract, as though
Mm.
these things are written and Iran is going to get $300 billion and the Straits of Hormuz are going to open up and everything is going to happen. And I think clearly it's an NFL contract where there's a lot of pie in the sky that's being promised here, but there is no impetus to actually deliver any of it. I don't think that either side actually thinks that either of it's going to happen. I think the only question we have to ask is what's the signing bonus? What's the guaranteed part? And already we've seen this week that the U.S. has allowed Iran to sell its oil in dollars
Yeah.
and lifted that part of the embargo, which is a big bargaining chip. Um, but I don't think that we should in any way read through the full details of the MOU, which, by the way, a lot of it leaves completely open and with really vague language, and think that there's really anything discernible. I think that the best model to understand the MOU between the US and Iran is to read the very similar 20-point plan when it came to Gaza. And all of the same sort of pie in the sky things were promised that Hamas is going to disarm, that they're going to build the Riviera and all this beautiful area. And both sides knew that Hamas was never going to disarm. Both sides knew that there was never going to be a Riviera that's built there. But you say all of these pie in the sky things to basically ratchet down the violence and just kind of keep the chaos contained and as it is.
Yeah, you need something on the table in order to just kind of
Right.
turn the burner down.
When it comes to Iran and the US, there's no deal, there's no peace agreement. It's not even called any of those things. The fact that they were able to open up some shipping in Hormuz, maybe, and that oil prices have gone down by 15, 20%, I think both sides got us what they want. But before we, cry out that the sky is falling because Israel is being left behind in all of these negotiations, I think that it would be foolish to look at any of this as being binding or I think that at the end of 60 days, they say that they're supposed to come to a certain amount of agreement, and if not, it could be extended. It's just like with Gaza, it's going to be extended. And we Americans, from our mentality, come from this idea that we have to have a solution, we have to fix the problem. And the Middle East is not into fixable solutions, it's really into contained chaos.
That's a perfect way of saying it. It's you know, it's fun to see tourists in Israel
Mhm.
and then to be shocked by Middle Eastern behavior, and then Israelis with their very beautiful thick Israeli accents go, "Welcome to the Middle East."
Uh-huh.
Um, because that's exactly it. Like, it's different rules. It might present as Western. It might or we might have certain language. I'm not talking about Israel right now. Iran, we might have certain language that we can agree upon, but that doesn't mean that the customs and that the understanding of how you do business is even close to being the
Right.
same.
It's like standing in line in England versus standing in line in any Middle Eastern country, right? There is no line, there is no order. Everyone sort of just groans and pushes forward until basically you're in the front.
Yeah.
And if you're weak enough to let yourself be cut in front of, then you're a friar, you're a sucker,
Yeah.
and that's what's going to happen to you. I think that we are reading these tea leaves of what's going on in the Middle East like Westerners who believe in rules and obligations. And I think one of the ways that Trump tends to succeed in these cases is that he acts much more Middle Eastern in this way and
He's contained chaos.
yeah, is comfortable in the
He's
chaos
contained chaos.
and is comfortable saying things that say one thing on a Tuesday and the opposite on a Wednesday. And this day he's saying that Netanyahu's crazy, and the other day he's saying that Netanyahu's his best friend. And he runs hot and cold and says kind of what he has to say because there's no authenticity to any of it. Like there's no, it's all a show. And I think that
Absolutely.
this MOU is a show, and I think that we often get kind of sucked up into the show and taking it for real, and just remember that it's a show.
I think that politics is it's a big performer stage, especially now. And we don't fully understand the ins and the outs of what happens between two global powers who really don't speak the same language in terms of values, in terms of religion, in terms of their value for life, in terms of just everything. And so we're having it. I find this just to be so interesting in diplomacy in general. Like, the nuances that have to go into creating any kind of agreement are enormous, and for something to hold up is nearly impossible.
At the end of the day, there are things that the US is asking for that Iran is never going to give. They're never going to completely turn away from their nuclear program. They are never going to turn away from their ballistic program. They are never going to give up their proxies. These things fundamentally are not going to happen. The only way this would eventually happen would be if there would actually be an uprising against the IRGC, against
I
the
mean,
power that be in Iran, which
there's
has
been
not just happened, and there've been 30 plus thousand people killed
in
in a week. in a bloody military crackdown on this, and that's a very Middle Eastern sort of might makes right way of ruling, which
It's
that's
typical, yes.
this is what happens. Um, we are not going to. There's a lack of diplomacy is only going to bear so much fruit, and I think personally it can be a mistake. Some people are making the criticism that, well, isn't this just JCPOA all over again, the same deal that Obama basically negotiated, which is give Iran money and hope that they will, be incentivized to join the nations of the world and stop their revolution against the West. Um, I think there's a big difference between the two. I think, first of all, again, this is a memorandum of understanding. I don't think this has any of the follow through that you would
Yeah,
have in the
it doesn't hold up.
JCPOA. Second of all, when JCPOA was first enacted, Iranians had a active nuclear program, which was preparing plutonium to very high levels in order to have nuclear weapons. They had a full um, they had all of the components from the factories leading up to the actual the missiles and the nuclear weapons as well. Really, U.S. and Israel has done an amazing job over the past year of destroying those
Yeah,
capabilities
absolutely.
and setting Iran back 5, 10 years from their nuclear program and a lot of their ballistic programs as well. And so to have this sort of managed chaos now when you've already like taken out, like defamed Iran somewhat, at least in the short term, this might just be, as Israelis say, mowing the grass. But if so, it was a very extreme mowing of the grass.
It's, there's only so much you can control in the world, and uh you reading the newspapers. I mean, I think this speaks to a lot of conversations I've had with people reading the newspapers and watching TV and following social media, and it it can be terrifying how little power we have over what happens.
Yeah.
I'm really, truly, and the people who make decisions for the rest of the world, I don't think are always thinking about the best for humanity. I think they're thinking about a lot of other things, um, power, and they're corrupted by power, and all of the things that I think should scare us. And yeah, so you say that, and I just have to take a deep breath because it's mind-boggling
It's
how
heavy.
how little power we have over any of it.
In the same week, when we were talking about this, you had two incidents happen in New York City. You had this
Montreal.
just, well, Montreal, yes, the shooting, although as of our taping right now, I don't know if that's been clarified to be an anti-Semitic attack.
Okay, I thought it
Um,
was.
you had the speech by Mamdani, which was right. Honestly, it could have been out of 1930s Germany of talking about AIPAC as monsters, as dark power that is funneling money towards Israel and its genocidal campaign against kids, against people who are behind the scenes, pulling the strings on world politics. Just so many different libels against Jews. You could have just sat up there and just read Protocol for the Elders of Zion, the old, Tsarist Russian book, made up as though the minutes of this meeting of the secret Jewish cabal, and it would have fit right in with Mamdani's speech, which he has refused to back down from. You had days later this incident in Brooklyn, this coffee shop in which Dan Goldman, who was running for Congress, was bought coffee, and they rescinded his offer and they refunded, saying that as he's a Zionist, that they would refuse to serve him. And now the sounds like the Department of Justice is actually going to investigate as a civil rights infringement the fact that they did this and went so public with it. But you see this sharp outing of Zionists once and again from polite society. And so on one hand, you see in Israel, elections are coming up, and there's this worry about our American Jews and the world less concerned about Israel. On the other hand, in America, you have these signs where when the mayor is saying this, and when a congressional candidate is being treated that way, for a lot of Jews, there's the thought of, oh my goodness, am I going to need Israel? Am I going to be safe here in New York? And so it's that same, your boundaries that you're found within in trying to figure out what's my safe space as a Jew.
What do you feel? You as you.
Me is me. I go. I mean, I go day to day on this. I think that personally, it would be erroneous for us to say that that we today are like 1930s Germany. I don't think there's anything that extreme. And I think there's a lot of important differences. On the other hand, it is becoming more and more acceptable in American society to withdraw from someone, out someone for being Jewish and suspicious of their Zionist ties. And I think that that is something that we've talked about this. That when I was growing up, my parents were growing up in America, things we never ever had to deal with. And I don't know, maybe one day we are Herzl, thinking that we are well accepted by the polite Viennese and Parisians and never good enough.
Mm.
And it makes me worry about it.
Well, I think that if we're looking at Israel for a moment, I think that American Jews do have I think we do have a role to play in, first of all, in the election in Israel. And I think that if we do want Israel to be a place that we can go to, if we need refuge, then I think that we have to see ourselves as being part of that future and having, I know Israelis like to say, you don't live here, you don't have the other ground here, you can have an opinion. I don't think that's true. I think that Israelis take diasporic opinions very seriously. Sometimes they shun it, but I think that they listen to it. And so one of the ways that that's happening is that it's actually being run, I think, through in conjunction with the reform movement, is that Israelis are being flown or flying home to Israel to vote in the elections, which is huge. That's number one.
We should state for those listeners that unlike in the US,
Right.
you cannot vote from abroad.
Right.
There's no
There's no
mail-in ballot,
absentee
there's no
ballot.
absentee. You can only vote in, not only can you vote in person, but you have to vote in the district in which you are registered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's number one, unless you're a
soldier.
Unless you're a soldier or you work at an embassy. That's number one. And number two, I think that we also, if we know Israelis or if we know organizations that need our support, we can put our time, we can put our efforts, we can put our finances into supporting those, because those are going to change the face of Israel. Those are the stronger the entities that we support, stronger that they are. I think that the more likely that those voices are going to be heard, and are going to have some element of power and have a voice in this next election. And so we sit here and we go, well, what can we do? The global politics are impossible. I think that we have to see ourselves as taking part in whatever change needs to happen, whether it's in America, being proud, writing to our congressmen, congresswomen, speaking about it, informing our children, supporting Israeli organizations. If you're Israeli, going to vote in Israel, all sorts of things that we have the power to change.
I love to moving towards ending on that note and saying that by the time that this gets published, this podcast, a delegation of our congregants will be just about to get on a plane,
Right.
and about 10 of us to go to Israel and to spend the week volunteering with about 150 others from North America. And I think that it's such that ethic not only of showing up and doing the work to help out, but I think that a lot of the Israeli sentiment around their place of the world is a feeling of loneliness and abandonment, and that people will show up and go to Israel when times are good and the tour buses are flowing and all of the tourists are there. When you show up when the chips are down, and to say to Israelis like, you're not alone and we care about this place, we care about you. I think there's something deeply comforting about that, deeply meaningful, and
I agree.
and maybe to feel a little bit less isolated, especially with all of the news we're talking about this week, and Israel feeling even abandoned by the U.S. in this moment. I want to ask you one thing, if that's okay, before we wrap up. There's a school of thought that says that, you know, if America distances itself from Israel, if America does so through its youth really being, disengaged with it or turning against Israel, that Israel, in being a strong military power in the middle, in a very important region of the world, that it has value, and that if it's not going to be the U.S. that Israel partners with, then there are other countries out there. There's China, there's Russia, there's other ones. And before, that might sound crazy to us, but we both know that during Israel's War of Independence, that the U.S. was not supportive of Israel, and that it was Russia through Czechoslovakia that provided the weapons for Israel to win the War of Independence. And it wasn't until the Russians really sided with the Arabs. I mean,
Yeah,
makes much more sense to side with multiple countries with tens of millions of more people and with oil assets. And once they did so, then the U.S. came in to really with Nixon in order to be the most close with Israel. That Israel doesn't, we maybe shouldn't take it for granted that the US and Israel always have shared interests. It's hard to even say that because, growing up in America as a good Zionist Jew, so much of my upbringing is around the fact that there are shared values. They're both democracies, right? They both have free speech, free press. They both have diversity, freedom of gathering of religion. Israel just had its big Pride weekend
right.
and parade, and there are people from all over Africa and the Northeast who came to Israel for that. So I just sort of think in my head, like, of course, that U.S. and Israel are going to be partners, but maybe that's not an assumption that we should hold on to with such assuredness.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important lesson in general. All of the constructs that we believe to be true can always be restructured and jumbled up. And if it's important to us, we need to put in the work so it continues.
Absolutely. So, any last hopes or wishes for the next couple of weeks as this goes forward?
Yeah, I hope that those who are making big decisions and are holding the power are thoughtful about the decisions that they're making and about the bigger picture and the peace and the order of the world. I'm very, very, very much pray for that. And I hope that your trip is successful and creates closer connections between our community in Israel and Israelis, and that you go safely and that you return safely.
Amen. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Landi, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.